Flanders Fields, the poppies glow between the crosses, row on row. Who doesn't know and love this infamous poem by John McCrae, one of the most famous, if not the most famous, war poem in history, commemorating McCrae's feelings as he looked out over the battlefield in Flanders, Belgium. Today, the poppy has come to symbolize the memorial of war, the memorial of sacrifice over centuries for freedom, but especially in the 20th century during the Great War and World War II. I remember when I was a little girl, I would help my dad to make the little paper or fabric poppies that would be given out for donations. The veterans would give them out for donations, and you still from time to time will see veterans selling these poppies that everybody wears on their lapels, or you tuck it into the rear view mirror of your car. I remember a few years ago when I was in England to film a documentary with my friend Chris Halton. We were there for Remembrance Day, and the whole city of London, it seemed, was just covered with wreaths of poppies. They had just had their celebration or their memorial services all over the city, and it was really something to see. That was something that I was so struck by in England and all over the country. It seemed everywhere that you went, there's such a reverence for the men and women who fought and died for the freedom of the UK. And you don't, there's not a bar that you go into where there's not a memorial to veterans. There's not a church that you go into where there's not a veterans memorial. And it really struck me as something just really incredible. And, I've always tried to grow poppies because I always loved the poem Flanders Fields, and my grandmother had these beautiful poppies in her backyard here in Chicago, a few blocks away from where I live now. And she actually was growing opium poppies in her backyard. I mean, she didn't know that, and it wasn't an issue back then, in the, early to mid 20th century, when she had this beautiful garden that took up like 2 lots in the backyard with every kind of beautiful wildflower and cultivated flower that you can imagine. But it was very funny because she had a woman that moved in. She had come from China to the United States, and she moved in next door. And she was a very elderly woman who was the grandmother of the family. And she came to live with the family next door. And one morning, my grandmother saw her out in my grandma's backyard picking her poppies. And it was only then that she found out they were opium poppies, because apparently the grandma wanted them for, therapeutic purposes, shall we say. But I always try to grow poppies when I had the good fortune of being able to take care of my mom's garden and plant her garden for her before her house was torn down a few years ago. But I was never able to grow those poppies. And I found out later on that the soil has to be very rich and very cultivated in order to grow corn poppies. And this is the poppy that has been immortalized in the poem in Flanders Fields. These are these bright red, beautiful poppies that you see there in all of the pictures of Flanders Fields and all the illustrations of the poem. And, there's this supernatural sort of legend about the Flanders poppy, because it was has been widely known that poppies really didn't grow in Flanders Field until the First World War, and it wasn't only John McCrae that wrote poetry about the poppies of Flanders Fields. There were other soldiers who wrote poetry about the poppies, and wrote home, many who wrote home to their loved ones about the like scarlet blanket that just covered the fields in Belgium during the war. And they didn't know at the time that up until the second year of the First World War, 1915, that was the first time that poppies were really widely seen in Flanders or in that part of France at all. And it came to unfold that all throughout the First World War, many regions that the war was fought in began to have these explosions of these bright red poppies just covering the battlefields. So this supernatural feeling, and legend rose around the poppies. It was almost as if this was a reminder of all of the men who had fallen on those battlefields. It was it was almost like it was God sending up these flowers where their blood had been spilled, these beautiful red flowers, just a profusion of them covering all of the battlefields. The Flanders Fields then has remained one of the most haunting, artistic, and just inescapable images of war throughout the 20th century and now into the 21st century as well. Of course, we've also, with research and the advent of the internet and the spread of lots of knowledge, including skeptical knowledge and secular knowledge, we now know that probably not a supernatural explanation for the eruption of these poppy fields during World War I on the battlefields. As I said, I found out the hard way trying to grow them that poppies needed very, very rich soil and very cultivated soil. And so in my mom's backyard, where there was clay like 2 inches below, all the dirt I would put on there every year, or as far down as I could go with my spade to try and work the soil a little more each year. That was nowhere near sufficient to grow poppies in my mom's backyard. But and I think at my grandmother's house, there were so many years of really great gardeners and my strong uncles as young men who would constantly dig down and work the soil for my grandmother. I think that's why she had so much better luck than I ever did growing poppies here in Chicago. But as it turns out, as more research was done and we began to learn more about just kind of everything, the cultivation, regular people, non-gardeners started to learn more about how poppies grow. Perhaps even a more haunting truth than, the supernatural explanation began to come to light. And that is that what happened in World War I is what made those poppies grow. It was not only the extreme cultivation of all of that soil from those troops marching constantly, from all of the skirmishes of battle, from the, all of this activity in those areas, which had never, some of these areas like probably had never seen, more than a handful of humans, these very remote areas of France. And then all of a sudden, terrible world comes to these idyllic regions. So all of that sudden disruption of the soil, right, for the first time in so many places. And then if we talk about the fertilization that's needed for poppies to grow, all of the dead in battle, the cattle that died, and other animals in the areas that died, all of that tragic cultivation that happened during the battles of World War I. Should be noted that since then, peace, relative peace has returned to Flanders Fields and other parts, these remote parts of France, there have not been the poppies seen that were seen in World War I. Most of the natural and pre-war state of the flora in the area has returned, even if nothing will ever be the same in Flanders Fields or in any of those battlefields of World War I, any of those areas, and World War II and beyond, all through these terrible wars that have come to pass. I hope you've enjoyed this little look into the history of the poppies of Flanders Fields. And I hope that this Memorial Day, you remember that this is the land of the free because of the brave, and that can be said for every one of the nations that these brave men and women so valiantly fought for, including the late great poet and soldier, John McCrae.
In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.